Well, some opposition parties are describing the State of the Nation address as nothing more than a pipe dream. So let's get more reaction from political analyst Sipho Seepe, who joins us now. Mr. Seepe, thank you very much for making the time to come talk to us here. I just want to hark back to the ENCA breakfast that we were watching just about 2 hours ago, and listening to the president of BUSA, Sipho Seepe, saying that the speech had feel-good, yes, Sipho Bijan, feel-good elements about it, but it lacked a sense of urgency in as far as the economic crisis that the country faces at the moment. Do you agree with him?
Yeah, I think most people would agree with him that there was a feel-good, there was an attempt to look into the future. But what we have is a social crisis, it's an economic crisis, it's a crisis of the state capacity to deliver.
But
and
Prof,
what,
the president makes a specific acknowledgement of the stagnant economic growth that the country is in at the moment. And I want to quote him. He says, this is a concern that rises above all others. What more did the president need to say about the state of our economy?
Yeah, but what you do, you stop going into dreams. You start saying, these are the steps that I'm going to take that are so sufficiently specific that people will see that you're actually dealing with a crisis. If the house is on fire, you don't imagine a situation where you're going to have a house that is not having any problem. You start talking about how do I extinguish the fire right now? Who do I bring and all that? And he didn't deal with that.
But he goes into a specific area, which is the lifeblood of this economy, and that's the crisis at Eskom.
Yeah.
He makes it clear that at Eskom, he is going to appoint soon a CEO, but also a chief restructuring officer. Doesn't that give some distance to at least making sure that over and above the stability that we have seen in that institution, he then addresses the leadership issues that will then filter down into operational and other issues?
Yeah, when you talk about a crisis and you are aware that there's a crisis, you tell people that this is how I'm dealing with it. You're not talking about appointing an individual, appointing a board and all that. And if you listen to your own coverage, Praveen was very clear about the whole range of crises at Eskom. And the president would have done a good job to simply saying this money is going to address the following. Because you come up with a big money, and if you listen to Sipho Seepe and say what you have is throwing good money into something that is not functioning. So you need to convince people that when I throw so much money, it will address the problem. But we've seen how many times money has been thrown to the state-owned enterprises without them getting anywhere. The crisis at Eskom, it's at a number of levels. The first one, as Praveen said, is at an operational level where you're dealing with issues of engineering and the generation of electricity. Then the second one he dealt with is the whole notion of the structure, which was going to be very difficult for the labor union who says you can talk about unbundling Eskom, but without making sure that there are no job losses. And there he was not very clear in terms of how do you restructure without creating and create efficiencies, without cutting people who are not supposed to be there. So that is one of the challenges that he himself said we need to have difficult conversation, but there was lack of clarity on that. And the last one that he dealt with was really the financial aspect, that yes, there is a heavy debt that we have to deal with, and the government is going to throw money in terms of addressing that. But the Eskom's problem is not only about throwing money. It's the whole entity is in a crisis at different levels.
Prof, quickly, just the last element on Eskom, because it is such an important entity. The president mentioning that there's going to be this chief restructuring officer whose sole mandate is going to be that of making sure that the institution is repositioned financially. But we know that at the moment the current CEO is serving out his notice, so a new one is going to come on board. The relationship between these two positions, it's been raised as a red herring by some who say, how will these two relate to one another? And could this have been the reason that Phakamani Hadebe left in the first place, because he doesn't perhaps know who to account to?
Yeah, actually, just on that, I want to take you back so that, because I want us to be very clear about that the issues are not individualized, that they are actually structural. When the president was appointed and when the argument was made that they appoint this person and remove this other person and the economy will grow, the economy has not grown. Instead, we have actually experienced the worst that had happened in terms of the economy after he was appointed. So the issues is not about him. It is structural issues. So again, to start looking for messiahs for our problems without dealing with the structural issues is where the problem is going to be. So that is one thing that the people must understand, that the solution is not about getting somebody. When Pagamani was brought in, we were told that this guy understands everything about the finances, about running, and he's now out. And of course, you are raising the issues of relationships, because there was also a challenge that people were raising, that you have a board, but you also saw a minister who appears not to take his board seriously, because when the unions raised issues around the wages, Pagamani and his team and the board were very clear about there will be no salary increment. And Pravin intervened, and they had a discussion with the unions and promised that the Eskom will address this issue. So the whole notion of where the power lies, who should dictate, and we have not seen the board really almost running the show. We have actually seen the minister running the show. So the issue of relationships becomes very important.
Exactly, especially if you look at the SAA issue. Let's move on, Prof. The overarching message that I read from the president last night, and here's the message that he delivered. He says, it's time to focus on implementation. Difficult choices will have to be made, and we won't be able to please everyone. In your view, what does that message talk to? And is there a specific target, perhaps?
Well, maybe to a certain extent, the president did not please everybody. If you listen to the opposition parties, they are very displeased. They say the president is dreaming while we are living in a nightmare. If you look at some of the comments by even his own members of the ANC, they're saying, we don't seem to see in your presentation the ANC resolutions of NASREC. We see those having disappeared. So you see a president who, despite his attempt to please everybody, there are many people who are actually displeased. You will also look at some of the proposals. I mean, if you take unemployment, and he talks about that in the next coming 10 years, we expect to have 2 million. If you cut down, you're talking about saying every year we introduce or we create about 200,000 jobs, but we have 10 million unemployed. So if you're talking about that, you are saying in the next coming 10 years, that number will remain static, because every year there are more than 200,000 young people who get into the job market.
But he talks about an economy that actually has to grow faster than the pace of population growth.
Yeah, so
it's unrealistic.
It's very unrealistic. I mean, as I tell you right now, the number of young people who get into the labor market every year is around 300,000. We have young people coming from universities joining the ranks of the unemployed. So supposing you're talking about 200,000, what it means that you'll be only taking those who are coming out, and the rest of the 10 million are going to remain outside. So even in his own estimation, you're talking about a possibility of failure or a clearing. I mean, it is the plans suggest that there's going to be failure in dealing with unemployment.
Prof. Seepe, unfortunately, time is against us. That's where we're going to have to leave it. Thank you very much for
You're welcome.
the time to come through. Professor Sipho Seepe is a political analyst coming to make sense of some of what came out of the State of the Nation address.